Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Navigation 3 Ask Android live stream. I'm Don, and I'm really excited to be joined by the engineers who designed and built Navigation 3. So I thought we could start with some intros. So, Jeremy.
Hey, I'm Jeremy Woods. I'm the team lead for Navigation 3. Clara?
Hi, I'm Clara Falk. I am an engineer working on Nav3. Ian?
And I'm Ian Lake. I'm the engineering manager for the entire architecture team. So that includes Nav3 as well as some of our other projects such as Fragments and Nav2 and paging and room and a bunch of stuff. So thanks for having us, Don.
No worries. Thank you very much for joining today. So I'm Don. I work on the Android Developer Relations team. And yeah, we're all here to answer your questions. So if you have got a burning question, please do add it to the chat and YouTube, and we will get to it as quickly as we can. So with that in mind, let's get rolling with the first question. So that is, and let me just consult my spreadsheet. It seems like Nav3 is pretty basic compared to Nav2, with most of the functionality in recipes. Why is that? And maybe Jeremy, you could take this one.
Yeah, I'll get us started. Firstly, that's intentional, right? So Nav2, we were working with views and fragments, and we knew about Compose coming, but we were really kind of focused on simplifying some of the things that we already had. It was like really, really hard to get fragment transactions and those things right. And so Nav2 took all of those architecture components, put them together, and said, hey, we're going to give you all of these things working together in a box. You can't remove them. You can't replace them. This is what it is. With Nav3, we had Compose, and we really, really wanted to invest in being more Compose-like, as close to Compose as possible. And so we relied on building blocks and making it simple to really create a really simple navigation system, and then allow developers to determine what they wanted to add to that system, right? And so instead of automatically having to use view models or having to use save state or whatever those or the architecture components are, you get the options and the hooks to put in the things that you want, and then we offer the recipes on the side.
Nice. Yeah,
thanks,
really good point, Jeremy. You know, it's like when you think about it, like every app has like different subset of features that they actually want to include in their app, right? So yeah, if you're just getting started, you're like, no, all I want is just like two screens, like go from one screen to the other one. Like that should be simple and easy, right? But you know, it's like when you start building on top of that, oh, now I need a bottom nav, now I need this. Like that's really where like the recipes come in, where you get to pick and choose. You're like, oh, okay, like this is how I want to do things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to mention that the recipes are kind of candidates for promotion as well. So if we see a lot of use in a given recipe, or even just a single function inside a recipe that it seems like everyone is using all the time, then we can move it into the library. So yeah, upvote recipes you like, I think, is probably the message there. Any more to say on recipes?
Well, I think one thing that's really interesting is like trying to use this building block approach has really meant that we need to be honest and use our own hooks, right? Like we can't just like, oh, we're gonna add this thing and you don't get the option of adding at that same layer, right? So like Clara, I know you worked a lot on the decorator APIs and stuff in Nav3, and it's really interesting. Like, oh, we want to add view models. They're like, oh, just use a decorator, right? And it didn't have to be this like, oh, we need to like custom build in something that only we have the hook for, right? And I think that's a really powerful part of Nav3.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay. So let's move on to another question then. So the next one I have in is, when are deep links coming in Nav3? And Clara, I think you've been working on this, so maybe you can take this one.
So right now we have recipes on our recipes repo showing you how to use deep link or how to deep link in Nav3, from simple use case of linking with an exact URL to parsing arguments, to more advanced use case such as supporting the up and back button with synthetic backstack, and managing your tasks. So our recipes show you how to do that, and we have helpers that you could probably reference. And as Don mentioned, some of our recipes may be graduated into APIs. So we wanted to get some feedback first and see if any of the helpers we provided is worth adding to the library. And yeah, so give it a try. And also, if you have any feature requests or certain things about deep links that you want to see how it's done, feel free to file a request on the GitHub repo.
Cool. Thanks, Clara. I think it's worth mentioning that we just published quite a long, well, Clara actually did all of the authoring here, a guide on how to implement deep links. So you don't have to use our recipes. There's a really comprehensive guide that shows you how to add deep links kind of from scratch using some of the Nav3 APIs.
Yeah, it's funny because like in Nav3, like you own the backstack, right? So if you think about what does deep linking actually mean, it's just, well, how do I get the information from the system, like from your intent or whatever, and build the right backstack, right? And like it's not really any more complicated than that, right? But yeah, there's a lot of steps involved there, and that's where the recipes can kind of help out.
Yeah, we mainly try to point out a few things that you may want to pay attention to, or a few principles that are most important when you implement deep link. And recipes are basically us showing you one way of doing it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to another question then. So the next one I've got in is, how can I use a nav display inside a nav display? And are there any problems with doing this? I'm looking at you, Ian.
Problems? I mean, there's maybe some self-inflicted problems, I guess, but no, they should all work just fine, right? Like the whole idea is this is just another composable, right? So all of the same techniques that you could use for nesting one composable in another, right, work just fine in Navigation 3. So the whole concept of having one nav display inside another nav display, totally. The real question is this something you actually want to do, right? And I think we've seen some examples of where people are kind of reaching for this pattern. One of the cases was if you want to have a bottom nav only on a certain subset of destinations, right? And I think that is kind of a pretty natural way of thinking about it, but it also is something that we're trying to build better tools for you to do in the first place. I think, Jeremy, you were talking about kind of some of the things we were planning on doing for Navigation 1.1 around this.
Yeah, absolutely. The going to stable, we were trying to really get the base APIs correct and make sure things were solid in that way. And then for 1.1 is really our scenes release, where we're focused on the different form factors and improving scenes. And one of those features is scene decorators. So the same way that you have nav entry decorators that provide information to the content of the nav entry, we want to have scene decorators that provide information to the content of the scenes. And so you can imagine something like a bottom nav scene decorator that knows when it should be on the screen versus when it should not be.
Right. That way that common UI has a place to be, and you're not trying to toggle things on and off. And I think in Nav 2, we were recommending people do shared elements on screens, right? And including the bottom nav in every screen. And we're that works great on phone layouts. And you could actually do that in Nav 3 now too, and have a bottom nav in every screen, right? But where it breaks down is kind of those large screen, right? Where it's well, do you really want your list pane and your detail pane to both have a bottom nav? That's probably where it's you need something that's at higher level, right? Where it's not really tied to individual screens, right?
Yeah, like the scene and the thing that knows about the entire scene itself, right?
Right.
So is the idea behind scene decorators that let's say you've got, I don't know, a list detail scene that you're using on large screens. Would you be able to have a decorator that gives you a different navigation, let's say a navigation rail, for that scene versus, let's say, a navigation bar for a single pane scene?
Absolutely. You could definitely apply it that way, and like you could have a different decorator for each of the different form factors that you have, or for each of the different scenes, or you could put them all into one decorator and have the decorator determine when it should show the which individual common UI piece. So it's based on how you kind of want to approach the problem. We'll work with the material team to figure out exactly which one we would want to publish and make public. But yeah, it's the beauty of Nav3 and the thing that kind of comes out of it is all these things are completely customizable, and there you can frame them to your use case.
Nice. Just on this before we move on, the one kind of legit use case that I've seen for nested nav displays is if you want different transitions for your top level like stacks versus going between individual screens in those stacks. So I think the material guidelines do specify a different type of transition for when you're tapping on that bottom bar to when you're going deeper into a given stack. So that could, I mean, ultimately nav display is just handling transitions. Right? It's a fairly, if you look at the code, it's actually really minimal code, which is why it's been able to be published for multi-platform. But yeah, it just handles transitions, and so nested nav displays allows you to have different transitions depending on where you are in your navigation graph.
Yeah, it's kind of funny thinking about like view.java, where it's like 24,000 lines of code, and we're like, oh god, like no one wants to touch that. And we're looking at like nav2, where it's like nav controllers, like 4,000 lines of code, and we're like, all right, no one really wants to touch that. And like when we're writing nav3, we're like, oh man, this file's getting like 500 lines of code, and we're like half of that's comments, and we're like, no, it's still too long. Like we gotta more building blocks, right? And it's been kind of an interesting kind of experience of kind of trying to be like, all right, well, what is this like single use kind of thing, and really trying to build on that, right? And not have one thing doing 10 different things.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so next question. How can I share a view model between two screens? Okay, maybe I can take this one. Actually, this came up on the recipes repository. It's come up a few times now. There's a few ways you can do this. The first way is to have a custom entry decorator where you share a view model which has been created by a parent with a child entry. And you can do this by specifying the parent ID when you create that child, so the child knows who its parent is. The decorator reads the child's parent ID and can share the view model based on that ID. Hopefully that makes sense. We have a recipe coming up for this soon. Another kind of similar approach is you can use a state object, and there's the recipe which is result as state, shows you how to do this. So you would just have a shared view model as in a shared state object, so that both nav entries can access it. So hopefully that answers the question. Jeremy, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I would say it's important to kind of decipher your use case and see why you're really doing this. So in old navigation, and I'm sorry for invoking the past like this, but in Nav2 we had nav graphs, and nav graphs had their shared view model. And the reason for that was like you might have something like a login nav graph where you wanted all the information to be shared together. In Nav3, you could have an entirely different backstack just for your login, and that backstack could have decorators that are for that state. So you could have a view model that is dedicated to that backstack, and that entire backstack can share its state together. And so it's not like this floating shared view model thing we had before, but the concept is kind of the same, where you can hoist that state and that entire backstack will kind of know about that view model together.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Jeremy. I think it's really easy to think about like, oh, what's this one-to-one thing, especially when you're doing like a migration or trying to move to nav3, right? But I think it's really important to kind of take that half step back and think about, okay, what use case was I solving with this, right? Like, oh, am I using the previous view models to like send a result back, right? You're like, okay, well, like maybe you can get that same functionality, but with a different implementation, right? Same with like, all right, I need like a shared login model, right? Like maybe that actually is, using a different backstack that has a decorator that provides kind of that shared context for all those screens, right? So it's not the same approach, but a lot of the same problems are solved, right? And I think that's why a lot of our recipes are focused around problems and not solutions, right? It's not, oh, here's how to share a view model between two screens. It's here's how to send results back, right? And it may be that in some cases, how you want to do that is via a shared view model, right? But focusing on the problems instead of like what you've attempted as a solution can be a really good way of avoiding like these like XY problems where, we're talking past each other.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian. So let's move on. We actually have quite a lot of questions to get through, so maybe we can speed things up a little bit.
Lightning round.
So question is, yeah, why is save state configuration needed in nav3? Where is the state stored when the screen is recreated in the backstack? And in what cases would you override it? Anyone? It's quite a long question.
Yeah.
Well, like I think if we think about it, like I think it was a really conscious decision to not have the backstack be everything, right? It's really just the keys that figure out, okay, like this is the identity of each screen on the backstack, right? But where the actual state is stored is actually at the decorator level. So it's decorators that actually are storing state on the per screen basis, right? And if you're using nav display and it's like backstack, it's actually doing a lot of internal work to kind of create what's called a decorated nav entry, which is this idea of a nav entry that includes some of the state. Maybe Clara, I think you can talk a little bit more about some of the decorator structure here and how that works with save state.
Yeah, so decorators is about one of the main function is providing scope. So in particular, the savable state holder decorator provides a scope to each entry, which is the view model store for that particular entry. And then, so the save state is per entry by default. In terms of an actual use case of when you could use save state configuration, one thing that comes to mind is, well, because save state configuration is for storing serializable values. So one use case would be in view models. For example, if you have multi-modular, you have a multi-modular app, and each modular has their own serializable keys defined. You could use a save state configuration to provide serializer module, or you could inject a serializer module for each module for like the different keys, and then you can use that view model to save and restore states or save and restore the keys for the different modules. If that makes sense.
Cool. Okay, let's move on. So another question relating to state here, requiring us to add the remember savable state holder nav entry decorator when adding entry decorators seems like a foot gun. Are you working to improve this?
Yeah, I'll start us off here. So we've had a lot of conversations about this and like what to do with this. So just some background. When we originally were creating Nav3, we were like, everything, remember, Savable needs to work inside of all your entries. And so this thing needs to be there all the time, and there never needs to be a reason for it not to be there. And then we got into decorators, and it was like, okay, when should this always be the outside decorator, or is there a reason that this would not be something that is the first decorator that you add? And so we kind of had these discussions, and we did a lot of back and forth and going. And what we determined was, hey, why are we not allowing developers to handle this themselves, right? So you kind of wanted the control, and so we kind of gave it up because we could not kind of determine all the time when the proper placement of this decorator would be. And so we kind of said, yeah, okay, we can't determine it. We're going to let the people that know determine it, and we'll kind of move forward with that. Are we considering changing it in the future? We're always open to feedback, is the answer. I would say there's definitely the possibility of adding like some defaults into the system. But I think what you'll find in using it is that it is definitely having that power to kind of move it around and have it where you want, even if you don't want to use it at all, is definitely valuable.
And there's always someone who doesn't want it, right?
Well, and even like the remember savable state holder, like it takes a parameter. Like there's a default value there, right, of what savable state holder you want. So it may be that you still want to use it, but you want to use your own savable state holder, right? So like there are cases where even if we say, hey, everyone should use savable state holder, which I mean, you probably should be saving state for every screen. You might still want to control where that savable state holder is, right? And not just use that default value, right? And that's kind of one of those flexibility things where it's like, hey, like you're the only one who can know exactly what your app needs, right? So,
okay. Why do we have to add animations in metadata? It feels so verbose. There should be a DSL for building these things more beautifully. I have paraphrased that because it didn't quite make sense. So, yeah. I mean, I can have a go at this and say, I disagree. I think metadata can be very elegant because the object that you need to control gives you a helper function that defines that metadata. For example, what we're talking about here is nav display gives you helper functions to override those transitions between screens. And the same pattern is used with scenes and scene strategies. They provide helper functions to define scene-specific metadata. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any opinions on this, but I'm not aware of any plans to add a DSL for making it less verbose. But maybe Jeremy, there are other plans.
Yeah, I'll pass to Clara, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we do have plans for 1.1 to work on the metadata DSL. Because right now, at first we wanted to make it like really flexible, hence the any type for the value. But it seems like we made it too flexible. So we want to make it so that it's a bit more type safe and I guess easier for people to grok and use without having to get through all the documents. And in terms of why, it's because we want you to be able to control or to have control at every layer. So the metadata is for you to find control the entry. And yeah, speaking of metadata, actually we also added metadata for scenes as well. It's fairly new. I think it was added about a month ago. And that metadata for scene gives you finer control on scenes. So we kind of like, it's kind of like building with different layers and making sure you have the control over every layer as you build.
Cool. Thanks, Laura. Okay, let's move on then. Next question is, how do you do shared transitions with Nav3? Jeremy.
Yeah, the same way you do your transitions without nav3. Nothing in nothing in nav3 changes what you do in Compose naturally, right? So the actual implementation is you would wrap your nav display in a shared transition layout, and then you would add the modifier to the entries to the content that you actually want to be there, and all of that kind of works. It works fine. You have all the scopes that you need, the entries provide the animated content scope that you need, and all that just works. If you're having issues, I think we do have some examples and recipes to kind of show you that.
Yes, we do. And related to this, there's another question, which is, are there any plans to introduce local shared transition scope and local animated visibility to improve the overall developer experience?
Well, I know that second one is actually already there, because there's actually already a local nav3 animated content, which extends animated visibility scope. So there's already actually that in there. Unfortunately, so because we don't support shared elements, you have to still wrap nav display in your own shared transition layout, right? Then you would be responsible for kind of figuring out how to get that shared transition scope into your individual destinations. So we've been talking a lot with the animation team to try and figure out, like, is there a scope that we can already provide down, right? Or another composition local here that they can provide at their level that would make things easier, because we have certainly noticed that, yeah, it's always a little trickier to kind of get that right scope down multiple layers.
So since we're on the topic of transitions and animations, another question is, can we get shared element transitions between the screen and the bottom sheet?
Well, the fun bit is that we don't control any of it. So the nice part is that navigation is all built on top of Compose. So if it's possible in Compose, it's possible in Nav3 because we're just building on top of them, right? So nothing that navigation is doing is stopping you, but nothing in Navigation 3 is really changing the underlying system, right? So depending on how your bottom sheet is set up, changes kind of how things like shared elements and stuff work. So for example, one of the current limitations of Compose shared elements is that they need to be in the same window, right? So if you think about dialogues and how some bottom sheets are set up, they're built in a separate Android window, right? That kind of floats above your activities window. In those cases, like shared elements just aren't supported even at the Compose layer. So unfortunately, there's not really anything that we can do on the Nav3 level to kind of change the physics of the universe. But there certainly have been some external projects who, when they're building out bottom sheets and stuff, don't use a separate window, right? And those kind of approaches would potentially allow shared elements between those things. So really kind of depends on what composables you're using under the hood.
So I think we have a related question here, which is, I won't read it all, but when will we be able to pop a bottom sheet from a backstack from code and get an animation for it? Jeremy.
Yeah, that's actually something we were looking at in 1.1. We realized that right now we don't have any way for what we call our overlay scenes to like read animations or send any signals back to nav display, and so this is just totally impossible right now. But we think that there is a possibility of adding some of those, like maybe even via decorators, but like adding some of those signals so that we can pass back and let bottom sheets know, like, hey, this is the animation that's currently running, and we can trigger animations, and like we can get the signal when it finishes, and so we can make the right lifecycle move. So be on the lookout for 1.1, and I think there might even be a bug in Buganizer right now for this.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is one of those like physics of the universe kind of thing, like how compose works, where it's actually totally possible for a bottom sheet to animate out. Because if you think about our dialog destinations, they actually do animate out even when you pop them off the backstack, right? And that's because the actual dialog composable stays alive until the actual dialog window goes away. So because that sub-composition in the window gets to run independently of the existence of the dialog composable in content, right? It actually still lives long after kind of it's been dismissed, right? Depending on the length of your transition. So certainly something that, you know, you could certainly ask whatever implementation of bottom sheet if they want to support that same kind of thing, because it is totally possible on their end, right? But we want to try and make it easy so that even if you're not using a component that supports that kind of exit animations naturally, or if you're in the same window, right, then we would have the tools available to you.
Excellent. Okay, we've got about 12 minutes left, and I can see we've got at least 12 questions. So let's try and answer some quickly.
Yes.
So
no. Yes.
Nav display accepts a single scene strategy. So how can I use list detail, dialog, and bottom sheet strategies together? Okay, I can take this one. So the then infix operator can be used to chain strategies together to make one strategy that will call calculate scene for each of the individual strategies in order. So just use the then infix operator to combine those strategies, and you can have all of them evaluated in order. Okay, that was fairly quick. Let me see what else we've got. Will Nav3 become available and the default for Wear OS? And Clara, I think you've been working with the Wear team, haven't you?
Yeah, so we've been working with the Wear team to make it easy to use Nav3 and Wear. Actually, if you look at the Jarrett repo, you may already see some CLs up. So in short, yes. Time frame, not sure, but it's coming soon.
Yeah, Wear's been a really good partner for Nav2, and they're really excited about moving to Nav3 and stuff too, where like, oh man, like the amount of code they have to write is so much less. So it's been good having that relationship and stuff. So hopefully that'll all be coming to Wear here pretty soon.
Yeah.
Excellent. Next one. So is Nav3 Compose multi-platform? Yes. Jeremy.
Yeah. So yes, it is multi-platform, but it's a little different. So Nav3 runtime, Navigation 3 runtime, is completely Kotlin multi-platform. We depend on Compose runtime, and Compose runtime, all the platforms that it supports, we support. Navigation 3 UI depends on Compose UI, which is not exactly multi-platform just yet, but it is supported via JetBrains and CMP. And so JetBrains has published a Navigation 3 UI CMP module that is completely multi-platform. So you can blend these things together. You can use you always actually have to use the Android X Navigation 3 runtime, and then you can add JetBrains' Navigation UI on top of that, and you will have a CMP app. And we've seen apps be developed in iOS and desktop and web already. Actually, there's a repo that a developer from JetBrains is actually running that runs and that coincides with our Nav3 recipes repo that provides CMP solutions. So yes, is the answer.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, next one. I'm confused. When should I use adaptive layouts and when should I use scenes? I think
I see the confusion. These are the same thing.
Wow. So I think the difference here is that scenes contain navigable content. So they're designed to contain nav entries, whereas adaptive layouts can contain any composable content. Anyone want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the nice part is like you can make your app adaptive at any layer, right? So, we were talking about the scene decorators, right? Like maybe switching between nav rail and bottom nav, right? That's an adaptive pattern, right? That doesn't really affect your scenes, right? It's something outside of your scenes, right? And your scene itself could use adaptive patterns, right? It could choose to do 2 panes rather than just 1 pane, right? And similarly, inside one of your own screens, right? You can also use adaptive layouts, right? If you want to switch from a list to a grid based on how much size you have, right? So I think the whole idea of adaptive is it's really not just one layer that is looking at being adaptive, right? It's really every layer of your app on what's the best user experience and how can you build with these adaptive layouts, right? Like maybe it is that you want to both switch from list to grid and from list detail to single pane to a rail and bottom app all in the same app, right? And really kind of tie all those components together to really build the best experience for your users.
Cool. Thanks, Ian. Okay, next one. Is a core navigation module for all keys and a common navigator a good practice for modular apps? Ian, I know you've been thinking about this a lot.
Oh, I know. Yeah, you and I, Don, have had quite a few conversations about the common navigator thing and stuff too. But let's start with the common core navigation module. I think this is a really great idea if you love long compilation times. If every time you want to add a screen to your app, if you want to compile every module in your app and like have that, get that coffee, you're like, this is a great model for you. But I think when we've been building out kind of our modular recipes that we have, I find this doesn't actually scale very well from a productivity perspective. It's just easier for every module to kind of own its subset of keys, right? So if you look at kind of our hilt or coin modular recipes, you'll notice that each one of them kind of uses a much more disparate kind of model where they don't actually need a common module at all, which really helps with the compiler avoidance side of things. On the common navigator class, I think this is something where you kind of have to find the right fit for your team. Ideally, things that are operating on the backstack are really simple operations, right? You're just remove last with a predicate, right? But I think as teams grow, right, it's pretty natural to kind of have this need for some sort of like common navigator. But just be aware, like make sure it's not gatekeeping your own module teams, right? And like, sometimes that flexibility is good and sometimes that flexibility is too much, right? But because you own the backstack, right, you can really kind of choose whatever fits well for your project.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And just to add to that, Clara and I were working on the Now and Android migration to Nav3. And the key objects in that migration were the navigation state and the navigation events. So we did end up having the navigator class, which provides all these events, be passed to all the individual modules so that it could modify the app's navigation state. So that seems to work pretty well, but that's because our feature modules don't yet have any like really custom requirements for modifying that state. But if we did have those custom requirements, you could always provide extension functions on that navigator object because it has direct access to the navigation state. So I think the pattern works reasonably well until someone tells me that it doesn't. Clara, is there anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, just a small point. So if you do use Navigator, I think it's important to make sure it doesn't do too much. For example, if you're also storing states inside the Navigator, that complicates things because now you need to store the Navigator itself. So yeah, just make sure it doesn't do too much. And at least in the recipes, as Don mentioned, we show state being separate from the Navigator. So state is like where all your state is, and Navigator is just modifying or updating that state. So yeah, just make sure it doesn't do too much.
Yeah, I'd probably go further than that and say make sure Navigator has no state at all. It should be, it's just for events, and its job is to convert events into changes in state in the navigation state. Okay, next question. What specific optimizations have been made to improve performance in Nav3, and do we have metrics to visualize the difference? Jeremy, I know you've been looking at benchmarks.
Yeah, so just in general, the approach of Nav3 has made this so much better. So in Nav2, you had to inflate your entire nav graph and before you even got started. In Nav3, we have the entry provider, so it's like lazy. You don't have all your entries aren't necessarily there yet. So like that's already a major improvement over anything we've done just in the approach that we have in navigation. And then by you owning the backstack state now, this unique thing that we created in navigation too, where you had to change the state in the navigator, and then it went and it did something inside the navigator, and then that backstack state change would trigger another recomposition. And so like there was this round trip. None of that actually happens in navigation 3 anymore. So like just naturally the approach kind of made it faster. But we've also added benchmarks, and like we've been trying to look at the comparison between Nav2 and Nav3, and not just between Nav2 and Nav3, but between base compose and Nav3. And the good thing, like we're working on those measures and we'll release those as soon as like we have those numbers. And the like cool thing about Nav3 is because it's the building blocks and all those things are so intertwined, and you can separate them however you feel. We can benchmark Nav3 without animations or without certain parts of the library. And so we can like really drill down and make sure that we are performing in those areas that we want to be performing in, and we can know where our latency is coming from.
Cool. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay. Another question from the chat here. Screen switching transitions in Compose feels awful. Can you implement material motion as the default screen transitions for Nav3? No, but you can. So I think the plan for Nav3 was to try and match the system animations as closely as possible, so that when you move out of an app, it feels the same as when you're moving through an app. So that's kind of our default. It's not too complicated. Yeah, if you want the material transitions, then I think that perhaps we should provide add-ons through the material library that you can use to do that.
Yeah, if you looked at the Compose roadmap, the material team still has a backlog element for adding material motion implementations that match their spec. So I think it's a known issue on their end that it's a little bit harder to take from the spec into implementation, right? And that's not necessarily something that is, yeah, ideally it would be something that you could just throw in the material transition as our content spec, and it would all just work, right? Unfortunately, those content specs aren't available, but there are some third-party libraries that kind of fill in some of those gaps and provide that kind of enter transition, exit transition, stuff like that. So definitely consider looking at those. At the same point, I think we're always trying to work with the material team a little bit better and figure out, okay, what are those defaults, right? And I think there are some cases for like the predictive back one that we probably need to do some tweaks for our defaults even. to make sure they kind of better align with kind of how the guidelines have changed over time.
Great answer. Thank you, Ian. Next one. Do we need splash activity as a separate library now?
Well, splash screens haven't been separate activities for about 4 or 5 years now. So the splash screen API is still something that you'd want to use even if you're in a Compose app or if you're views and fragments based. So you would never actually use a separate activity for your splash screen. It would be the splash screen API that already exists is what you'd want to use. So Navigation 3 doesn't really change any of that. But maybe this is a good place to file a feature request on our recipes repository. So that we can kind of show kind of how to integrate these libraries together and stuff. Because I do think you're right. It's a little bit more complicated than you'd like.
Cool. Thank you. So I think we are running short on time now. So perhaps time for 1 or 2 more questions. Nav3 can handle bottom. Oh, how can Nav3 handle bottom tabs? I think that's basically the question here. So
say the line, Don. Say the line.
Okay, Nav3 can handle nav bottom tabs. How can we do it?
We have a recipe for that.
Oh, we have. Sorry. We have a.
Come on, Don.
Sorry. We have a recipe for that. We actually have 2 recipes for that. One's called Common Navigation UI, and the other one is called Multiple Stacks. And both of them show you how to do basically multiple substacks in slightly different ways. So, yep, there's a recipe for that. Okay, so maybe this one. If I save a composable in a backstack, will its state also be saved? Clara?
I'm assuming my save composable its state, the state for the, yeah. So you can do that with the savable state holder nav entry decorator. Or in general, you can wrap any entries with an entry decorator and provide state to that entry. So because you own the entry decorator, you also own the state that's passed to it. So you have full control over the scope of that state and the lifetime of that state. By default, whenever we pop or an entry is popped off the backstack, the state does get cleared, but you can customize that behavior. So in short, yeah, you have full control over that.
Great stuff. Okay, so last question. What are your plans for future versions of Nav3? Maybe Jeremy, you could start us off here.
Yeah, I'll get us started. So we just went stable. We're all very happy and everybody's so excited. The next release is 1.1. And in 1.1, this is our scenes release, right? So everything a lot of things we kind of talked about here with scene decorators and as well as scene metadata or metadata DSL, like those things are being added to the 1.1 release. And then there's also things like allowing the animation of the bottom sheets and moving transitions out of moving the on back callback out of the scenes and getting that into the proper place and things like that. So we're looking to kind of elevate our APIs and make sure we're covering all the use cases properly there. And then we're also elevating, hopefully elevating some of our recipes into the API. So as we kind of move forward, the goal is to have those recipes kind of baked in the nav recipes and see what developers are using, and hopefully we find things that are valuable to developers and we move those into the libraries. And that'll be ideally kind of how we move forward through the future. Anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Jeremy, you made a really good point. Like, I think for our 1.0 release, it's always tricky to kind of figure out what are those built into the library, what are those optional helpers that are in the library, and what are kind of in those recipes that you can use. And I don't think we've quite hit that perfect balance, right? So, I know some of the things like deep links and stuff, like there's probably a few bits in there that we're like, like everyone's going to need this, right? Even if it's just an optional helper in the library, right? So I think as we're kind of going through things, like if you see things that you're like, like feels like everyone kind of needs this, like we see some of that too, right? So we're going to kind of take that approach for every release and try and figure out, okay, like figure out that graduation kind of behavior and stuff. So I know, Don, you're thinking about kind of making that a little bit easier to kind of give us that signal on what recipes are helpful here too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're working on that and making sure that every single recipe has bugs filed against it that people can upvote, and then we review those upvotes on a regular basis. Just on the next release of Nav3, I think the thing that's most exciting for me is that many of the features are around scenes, right? These adaptive layouts and helping you to do form factor specific layouts and behavior, helping you to do it very, very easily. So all of these use cases that have been very difficult or impossible to do in the past, we hope that the next release basically opens up so many doors for doing adaptive layouts and supporting these large screen form factors. Jeremy?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add on to what Ian and Dunn said here. The idea of these recipes, and like just to be very open, the challenge of Nav3 is figuring out the things to add and which things not to add. And so like we just want to have that communication channel like extremely open and be honest. Like we're tweaking and iterating on these recipes bit by bit until we get it just right. And so like this new approach has kind of given us that option of being very transparent with developers and saying, hey, we think this is a good idea, and getting that feedback is that yes, this is a good idea, or no, like you totally shouldn't do this at all, or you should do it differently, right? And so all those things are very important to us. And I think as Nav3 kind of evolves and moves forward, like hopefully this will be a community development versus like just us with the ideas in our brain kind of trying to figure out what everybody else needs.
I think that's very well put. Thank you. And I think that's all we have time for now. So I want to say an enormous thank you to Jeremy, Clara, and Ian for joining me today. Hopefully that's been useful to you. And yeah, please do carry on asking questions and filing issues. You know, the recipes repository is the place to ask questions and file recipe requests and comment on things. So that we check it all the time. So yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from you and seeing what you build with Nav3. So with that, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.